Fantastic, and welcome to everybody. We'll just give a minute or so for people to come on into the webinar. I can see a few people joining, quite a few people flurrying there. So we'll just give a moment or so. I always feel we need a little bit of music or something to ease our way into the process, but we'll just let people come on board. My name's Sue Anstiss. I'm the co-founder of the Women's Sport Collective, and this webinar today is under the Game Changers heading. So it's one of the Game Changers podcasts that we do, and it's for that reason that we've created this webinar. It's one of 3. I can give a quick heads up to those that are following in the next couple of weeks while we're waiting for other people to come in. So we've got a webinar next week on race and equality across sport, and then one the following Wednesday, same time, following Wednesday the 19th, which is entitled Sidelined Women, and is around women and coaching and why we don't see more women at all levels of coaching, so high performance and grassroots too. So those are 2 other webinars that are coming up, and we'll be sharing more details of those in the week or so ahead. So I'm going to get started because we've only got an hour and it's a huge topic to cover, but so pleased that people are able to join us, and I'm so pleased that we've got these fantastic guests with us today for the webinar. As I say, it's a slightly different format to what we've used in the podcast, but a bit more of a roundtable panel and discussion. Obviously there's been a lot of talk recently in terms of clothing, women's clothing and sports clothing. We've heard debate around whites at Wimbledon, girls being forced to wear skorts and skirts for PE lessons, women not being able to wear the hijab to play sport, not able to dress modestly, and then the other extremes of women being forced to, I guess, be objectified a little bit in terms of the clothing they're wearing, whether that's the bikini bottoms or high cut leotards. So there's real extremes, you know, in this discussion around women and girls clothing in sport. I'm really thrilled about the panel that we've got today together. I'm so pleased. Everyone we asked said yes, which is always a fantastic sign. So really pleased to have you. And we're going to explore a lot of the areas, I guess, around sports kit to address some of the challenges that are faced. But I really hope that we can come out with some practical recommendations as well. I think it's an area we could talk about for a long time, but hopefully some practical guidance and tips that will help people moving away from here too. So I'm going to just I practice my introductions because I've refreshed them from where they were before, but to introduce the people that you see on screen here. Wendy Taylor leads on girls' work at the Youth Sport Trust, and she also leads on the hugely successful Girls Active initiative, which is delivered in partnership with This Girl Can and Women in Sport. Rimla Akhtar is the former chair of the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation and was the first Muslim woman to sit on the Football Association's council, and Rimla was recently awarded an OBE for her contribution to equality and diversity in sport. Tess Howard is a GB hockey player who won gold at the recent Commonwealth Games with the team there, so fantastic, congratulations there. She's also become a sports kit activist in hockey, really striving to change the guidelines to make sports policy more inclusive. And I know Tess and I have spoken a lot in the past. She's been very vocal in this area since she completed a dissertation at Durham looking at how sporting clothing affected girls' experience of PE. So it'd be great to hear from her too. And then finally, Holly Bradshaw is an Olympian who's been very publicly outspoken about the challenges facing track and field athletes when it comes to kit and clothing. And Holly and I have spoken in depth in the past, and Holly also was featured as a guest on the Game Changers, so we talked about this topic too. So that's welcome to the 4 of you, and thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if I can just start by asking each of you in turn, I won't keep going around in turn, but to start with, just to share why you feel so passionately about this topic of women and girls sports clothing, and why you agreed to come on and join us on the webinar. So Tess, sorry, Wendy, can I start with you as you're to that side as we go round?
Absolutely, thanks, Sue. I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm a mum of a 12-year-old daughter, so I kind of see and feel and kind of are living that experience with her. Secondly, I'm a former PE teacher myself, so again, I've been in school and had those direct experiences working with girls. And more recently, obviously, sort of the last 19 years worked at the Youth Sport Trust, really working hard to look at how we engage girls and maximise their participation and ensure that they have a voice in PE and school sport, and kit is one of those issues that could go a long way to addressing some of those challenges that we experience and girls experience.
Fabulous, thank you. Thanks, Wendy. And Tess, in terms of your involvement, why the fire is burning in you in terms of this topic area?
I think I've been fascinated by how barriers are created for girls in sport on the basis of sex, on the basis of religion and gender. And I think if we can create a space where there aren't those barriers for girls to be able to experience the purpose of sport, then that is the world that I want to live in. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it. My dissertation was, are school sports uniforms practical, professional, or patriarchal? And unfortunately, it's the latter that so often comes up. And I want to live in a world where they are practical and they encourage confidence and comfort in sport for girls so that they can experience the purpose of sport.
Thank you. Thanks, Tess. And Holly, in terms of your involvement, I know it's been quite a personal relationship yourself in terms of kit and the response to kit. So can you kind of share some of that with us?
Yeah, so as a young athlete, 18, 19 years old, I faced a lot of abuse online about the way I looked. Typically in athletics, you wear crop top with shorts, crop top and knickers, and I was very comfortable at that age wearing that, but there's no shying away from, I did have a bit of puppy fat and, you know, that was okay for me, but not for a lot of other people who said I was unattractive, it was unprofessional, and really, you know, abused me on social media. And that's created, I think, probably a lifelong kind of issue for me mentally. And it only really has come up recently in the last couple, you know, 2-3 years, where I like to cover my body up because of the abuse I face. I'm very self-conscious, and there's been times in my career over the last couple of years I've faced those barriers of not, you know, having to go out my way, try and, you know, kick up a fuss to get an outfit that allows me to feel comfortable, and I'm able to cover it up. And that's why I'm very passionate about it, because if I'm feeling like this, how many other girls are out there feeling the same thing?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk more about kind of specific instances too. And then Rimla, from your perspective, and again, we've spoken, you know, you're a fantastic guest on the, and I won't keep plugging the Game Changers, but you were a fabulous guest on a previous episode of the Game Changers, but perhaps share to us from your perspective why this matters so much.
Yeah, as everyone else has said, this is so personal. I think first and foremost, you know, growing up playing sports, and I think someone who chose to cover, you know, as I hit my teenage years, for religious reasons, it was something that I had to navigate, you know, wearing sweat tops and tracksuit bottoms whilst everyone else is in skirts and vests, and it's so personal. But I think throughout my time with the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, actually really not just focusing on Muslim women, but the principle of the fact that women should be able to choose what they want to wear when they're playing sports. That principle was something that I've kind of carried with me throughout my time. And I think, I mean, I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit later, but kind of fighting the hijab bans that sports governing bodies, international federations have put into place that have stopped women from participating. That injustice, that sense of injustice that comes with it is really real. And therefore it is a fire that burns within me. It's something I'm even right now, you know, working on. So it's a shame that, you know, I've been in the kind of sports administration side of things for the last 15 years, and we're still dealing with the same issues.
Yeah, thank you. And I noticed you said bans there, that it's not the one we talk a bit about the football ban, but actually it's progressed through, and we'll come on to that in a moment. And as I said at the outset, I'm really hoping that we can kind of address issues as they come up, but also then to look at some practical solutions or recommendations that we might have. And if we are going to, there's so much to go at, but let's kind of address initially, if we can start with, to talk about schools, I guess, where it all begins in terms of schools and the kit and clothing that girls are wearing in schools for PE. So I wonder, Wendy, can I start with you, because that's very much your specialist subject, isn't it? But are things changing? And I think we've heard some positive stories, but are things changing? And I guess I'm also keen to know if girls are given choice, if they had the choice, what do you feel they would wear, and what else should we be considering when it comes to clothing for PE?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I guess the starting point is, given the vast number of schools that there are in you know, within the education system, it's a really mixed picture, and there certainly is not consistency across the whole of the landscape. And I think, you know, what I hear is, you know, regularly is examples of both extremes. You know, actually when schools have done that really well, what that looks like, it looks like, you know, girls are at the centre of that that decision making. They're consulted, they're empowered to, to make choices and really have input into what they would like to wear during PE, and that there's an element of choice, because I think that for us all, we could all choose an outfit to wear of an evening, and I'm sure we would all choose something different, but ultimately, if we want to maximise participation for all our young people, that really has to be choice and focused on feeling comfortable, and that's going to really increase engagement, enjoyment, and remove some of those barriers. So we've got examples where schools will have a range of items that could be a skort, it could be leggings, it could be joggers, it could be shorts, and all of those are entirely appropriate for girls to be able to participate fully in the way they want to. I think when we begin to hit challenges, and some of that we've absolutely seen on return from COVID, when schools have come back, young people come back into schools, actually real reluctance from girls to go back into the changing rooms to get change, because they feel on show, they feel embarrassed, they're worried about for a variety of issues, and kit exacerbates those problems. So I think really focusing on young people and their needs and having choices is integral.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think choice is so important in all these areas, and giving girls the chance to actively contribute to that decision making. Anyway, I could ask you lots more questions. I'm going to move on to Tess, and I'm going to come back to questions there, because I think that I guess it's one of the reasons that schools don't then want to do that, is because of cost and the challenge of her having different kit and not having uniformity. So I might come back to you there.
Yeah.
Tess, I guess, what are your findings in terms of both the dissertation and the work that you've done since in hockey? Where do you feel it is good practice? What can work well?
Yeah, so my dissertation ended with understanding what girls wanted, and so I asked over 400 women what would they have wanted at school, and it all came down to choice, but everyone is different. But what was really interesting is that it's like realistic choice, because saying that you have both boys' shorts and skorts, well, girls aren't going to want to choose the boys' shorts, because that is not a genuine choice. So I think what we're seeing is that there needs to be a greater spectrum of items on offer, but also from suppliers that will be financially viable. So often what you get is in general school uniform as well, is girls' shirts being specially tailor-made by a school provider, and boys' shirts being a fraction of the cost from a wider supplier. So there are all these different layers, but it comes down to realistic choice. And I had a little experiment at Marlow Hockey Club last year, where I coached with the under-12 girls, and I got to take over the under-12 girls, and I said to them, our first thing is you can wear whatever you want. You don't have to wear Marlow kit, which is a fitted shirt and a skort. I said you can come in whatever you like. Some girls were like, can I come in my pajamas? I was like, do you know what, if that makes you play well, come in your pajamas. But so they came in all different outfits, and to begin, for the first week, people were still sort of wearing the normal kit, and as they saw other people break the mold and wear, jazzy shorts or leggings, then more and more started to feel comfortable to be able to make those decisions for themselves. And what I saw was girls feeling autonomous over their bodies, over how they looked, and then it enabled them to feel more confident on the pitch. So that was like a little social experiment that I thought was quite successful in giving agency to the young girls. So when I think of school uniforms in schools now, I think of what is rigorously inclusive. What is going to make those girls feel like they have choice? And that is when you have genuine choice. That's what I feel, I mean.
Oh, I love that. Rigorously inclusive. That'll be a catchphrase we'll be using later. I like that very much, Tess. Thank you. And I think that's a challenge, isn't it? Is it around cost and uniformity, and schools wanting that regularity. What have you found, Holly, in terms? I don't want to just kind of pinhole you into track and field, but in terms of kind of wider sporting kit for girls, especially at that school age and the teenage years.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether it was to do with social media, but at school, you know, we wore shorts and a t-shirt. I didn't think too much about it. But for me now, there's so many, I see so many people at the gym wearing knee-length shorts. They wear leggings, three-quarter leggings. And even myself, if I'm having a self-conscious day and I usually wear baggy shorts, I'll put leggings on because I don't want to have my whole leg out because I'm feeling a bit iffy about my body. And I feel like just having, like everyone said, the choices at school will just make people feel comfortable. And I can think back to a couple of my friends at school who absolutely hated PE. They did not want to wear shorts, so they would just pretend they've forgotten their kit or whatever not to do it. And that's such a huge barrier that doesn't need to be there to get people active. And I think the more choices we can have, and like you say, girl shorts, not just boys shorts, so they kind of feel like they have autonomy over their body, is super important. And you see it at the gym, and if we could just spill that over into schools, I think it would make a massive difference.
Thank you. And Rimla, in terms of, and you mentioned kind of your work around the hijab ban, but in terms of schools and British schools at the moment, what's the situation there for girls that may want to remain covered in terms of their religious beliefs?
Yeah, I think it depends. It does vary from school to school, isn't it? As Wendy was saying earlier on. And I think those that are kind of, that they recognise they have a majority particular faith, or they have a particular ethnic majority in their school, they are very eager and keen to try and cater to the needs of those women and girls. And so you do get some places where absolutely, you know, the kit is, you know, colours wise, or a general sense of the principles of what you need to be wearing, that might be dictated, but actually what it physically looks like, that isn't dictated. You know, there's a guideline in terms of, you know, if you choose to cover, then these are the options that you have. And I think you can still have that uniformity, you just have it in a slightly different way, and it's possible. That's what it shows. And I think just outside of the school space, it's the same with sports. And I think the point that Tess was making around the girls seeing other girls start to wear clothes that is different, that are, you know, reflective of themselves, and that encouraging them to also take that step forward is really important. So we've seen, as more and more women from different backgrounds are going into different sports and showing, for example, wearing the hijab or covering or wearing shorts instead of a skirt or wherever it might be, that's encouraging more girls to also say, this is a sport for me, this is something I can do. And it's so massive. So it's the same for the girls that are at school, and actually the schools should learn from the sports being played at the elite level in terms of what's possible there. And similarly for other women and girls to come into the elite sports space, it's just as important.
And thank you, Rimla. And I do feel, Wendy, I feel like it's a long time we've been having this conversation. Some of us have been around a very long time now. But in terms of some of the Nike research, it must be over a decade, 15 years ago, of knowing that girls want to wear something different in sport. So what is it that prevents that? Is it the money, that it's too expensive to offer different options? Is it the need to have girls conform because that's what schools do in terms of uniform policy and the colour of your hair? And the, you know, what do you think is the biggest barrier that stops it being something that it seems so obvious that we know it should be available?
I think, you know, I think for some schools there just doesn't seem to be that issue, you know. So Rimla just talking about hijabs, then, you know, there's a school in Manchester recently who was saying that actually they've supported the school by buying a big stock of hijabs, and then the girls are buying them back at cost. So there's a, you know, they're covering cost, but you know, there's, you know, so it's really reducing that barrier. It's made a massive impact in terms of kind of how girls feel coming to PE. You know, schools are, I guess, trying to walk that line between, you know, managing kind of cost of living, increased prices. There's also guidance from DFE now that's, you know, recently been introduced that sets out the expectations around, you know, uniform, but actually that it shouldn't be particular brands, you know, so it doesn't kind of further deter students, and actually there is a bit more flexibility. But you know, from our perspective, you know, that when we speak to schools and they certainly overwhelmingly see the kind of the views of girls, that's something that then, you know, once they open that conversation, they then are, you know, in a position where they want to work with the girls and actually, you know, hearing their voices and acting upon that to work with them. But, you know, as Tess has shared, you know, some of the practicalities around brands, or, you know, sort of making it financially viable, I guess, to offer a range is a challenge, but I think it's just, you know, for us, our responsibility to kind of keep moving that conversation forward, keep raising that, and around the potential of the impact that it will have on their subject and engagement of their learners, and, you know, the lifelong benefits that hopefully we all want to see for girls.
Lovely. No, it's good. And are you positive? Are you excited about where we are? Sorry, Tess, could you go ahead there?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add, I think a lot of the issue in private schools is around tradition. And so it's quite funny, because when I was doing my dissertation, I was just like so angry at so many different stages. But the main stage was when I read the school guidance for uniforms, which says schools must not discriminate based on sex, race, religion, gender, as per the UK Equalities Act 2010. Directly beneath it says schools can decide if girls can wear trousers or not. And that was just like, sorry, is that contradiction or is that contradiction? So I felt like there is still this pervasive narrative within schools that is tradition is fine. And so it doesn't matter what really the impact of that is. So my school I've been working with, I went to private school in Cambridge, and they've just introduced girls' shorts into their curriculum, and that is changing a traditional school's viewpoint. But hopefully what will happen is that as that school plays against other schools, they will see that it's actually not that big of a deal when a girl wears shorts. And like, adjacent to that is how policies can support. So what we've just done in England hockey this year is change the legislation so that it doesn't matter what girl or boy wears, the whole team doesn't have to wear the same thing. So that is a huge change, whereas you now can have, so hopefully I'll be one of the first Premier League hockey players to wear shorts, though the shorts have not been made yet, but at least the policy allows it to now. But that means that there is genuine choice, and that would come back to genuine choices when you can wear whatever in your team and still be fine. So I just wanted to add that to
Absolutely.
Wendy.
Is that at all levels, or we see that internationally in terms of that choice? Is that across the whole?
Yes, so the conversations are happening now with Adidas, with Specialist Sports, who responded really well to our asking. So myself and Anna Toman, part of the England hockey team, went to Adidas and said, first of all, we need a better tank tops, because they were called compression tank tops. And as you can imagine, that's not the most enjoyable thing to wear, compression tank top. So we've changed our tops, and we're on what would you say, a crusade to go and try and change the score rule. But it's not a blanket rule in hockey. It's just the accepted tradition. So watch this space, I guess.
Fascinating. But you heard it here first. Fascinating. Thank you, Tess, for that. I'd like to move on, if I can, to talk a little bit about white clothing in sport. And again, it's something that I do feel in the last few months, last year almost, has been talked about more than perhaps it has in the past. And again, coming back to that taboo of not talking about the one thing that, you know, affects almost half the population, but periods, menstruation, we don't discuss it. But there was much more talk around Wimbledon this year in terms of the women playing in whites. And I was interested in watching the Rugby World Cup out in New Zealand. I wasn't in New Zealand, but watching it on television this weekend, and that so many of the home nations, so the Scottish and the English team were playing in white shorts. So those rugby girls playing in white shorts at a national level, and how that then impacts girls playing in team sports in white shorts. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your thoughts on how much of an issue you feel that is for girls. I don't know who would like to take that one first, but just kind of interested to have your thoughts on. I feel it's an issue, a mother of 3 daughters, but how much of an issue you feel that is in terms of another barrier to girls taking part in sport. Wendy, did you want to jump in there? You waved your hand.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I guess kind of our ongoing research that we do each year annually through Girls Active. So just looking at the stats from the past few years in terms of girls' participation and the barriers they tell us. So periods has gone from being the sort of 3rd barrier to the biggest barrier to their participation. So of the 6,000 plus girls that we surveyed this last academic year, 39% of them told us that, you know, when they have their period, that stops them participating. So we know how much of an issue that is for girls in the PE space. I think if you then overlay that with having to wear a kit that you feel on show uncomfortable, you're worried, you know, so the kind of the top concern, you know, among the top concerns were concerns about leaking, having low self-confidence, self-consciousness in the changing rooms, and the worry that others will know when they're on their period. So it's a huge issue that absolutely, you know, I think white kit just, you know, will just exacerbate that even further. And
why has that gone up, do you think? Why has it gone from third to the most prevalent?
I mean, I think there's that increasing, you know, awareness of, you know, feeling self-conscious in your body among teens. I think probably COVID hasn't helped that situation as well. And, you know, general happiness around how girls feel in, you know, with the way that their body looks has also kind of, you know, sort of declined. So only 33% of girls told us that, you know, they're happy with the way their body looks, which, you know, is huge, you know, that's 67% that aren't. So that, you know, that's massive. And, you know, kit is one aspect that can really make that difference amongst, you know, a range of other things that they, you know, that we need to do within PE. And, you know, when we ask girls what is the top thing that actually schools could do to help make a difference, PE kit, better options for PE kit was the number one thing. And it's no surprise, and, you know, I don't think anybody's hearing anything that, you know, is new or surprising, but it does tell us we've still got a long way to go. So whilst I'm excited because I can hear, you know, lots of positive change from schools and the way that they're working with girls through that, you know, we've got a long way to go in terms of getting that consistency across schools.
And in terms of whites, Tess, I don't know, was that something that was flagged at all, or is that different in terms of the research that you've done, or are you playing red?
It was a huge part of it. It was a huge part of it, yeah. Especially, so one part of the research was around what made girls drop out of sport, and as Wendy has said, whites is a huge issue. We actually had an internal team survey sent out last year before the Euros, GB hockey team survey that said, would you like to wear a white skort at the Euros? And it was red or white was our choice for our kit, and we chose red and blue skorts, which was a really good show of, you know, what democracy can do. I do have a question though to Wendy. All the findings that you have, is that then translated to like the government's action plans? Because in the recent 2019 school sport activity plan, they didn't mention like changing bodies or uniform at all in the government's action plan.
I mean, I think I would love to, you know, I think there's things that, you know, practically we need to kind of, you know, galvanize schools and empower schools to kind of lead that change within, but, you know, at a policy level, you know, certainly from our perspective, that's something that we advocate and influence, you know, and obviously kind of working closely with a range of national partners to look at, you know, how can we drive that change, you know, in terms of the school sport and activity action plan, you know, and to help schools plan effectively to do that. Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, I would love to see changes at a policy level that kind of reflect that, what we know is needed.
I'm half keeping an eye on questions in my Q&A if I can, but one interesting point there is who makes a decision in schools about what's worn? Is that completely down to school, or they have their autonomy to choose what girls wear for PE, or is that?
Yeah, I think from, you know, certainly in terms of DFE guidance, there isn't, you know, schools don't have to have a uniform, you know, a school uniform. They don't have to have a PE kit. However, it is definitely strongly advocated in terms of the DFE guidance that I was reading. So, you know, and I think there is also a lot that, you know, schools want to do by having a uniform in terms of creating a sense of belonging, having a school ethos, you know, to also reduce some of those experiences that maybe single out individuals. So actually having that sense of community is important, and obviously therefore PE kit is naturally an extension of that. But, you know, governors and school leaders, along with, you know, heads of department, I guess, would have that ultimate say in terms of who makes that decision. But, you know, equally, governors, parents have a voice within that, as do young people, hopefully increasingly from our perspective.
Excellent. No, yes, indeed. And another comment made in terms of athletes as activists themselves and showing the way. And I'm always conscious that some athletes just want to be brilliant athletes. We don't all need to inspire the next generation. It's fabulous that female athletes do, but they should also be able to just be fabulous athletes. But Holly, I wonder from your perspective, clearly you have been very vocal and outspoken around issues around kits. It's obviously got easier because you're older, and I guess because you're an experienced athlete. You're not older, you're an experienced athlete, but also that you're in a sport where there isn't selection. So you're in a sport where you jump really high, and therefore, you know, you've got your qualification, haven't you? Rather than being, we talked a little bit earlier around some of the girls in some of the team sports or rugby or football, where they might not want to say, I'm not comfortable in white shorts, because it might impact how people feel towards them too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is still that in athletics. If you look at our WCP selection, there isn't just a criteria of if you jump this, you get on. That very much is the case for the Olympics and the Worlds and whatever. But in many scenarios, there might be 4 or 5 athletes that can only go down to 3 spots. So I definitely feel like a lot of athletes are scared to talk out or say their own opinions, not only through the selection, but also, I don't know whether, I'm sure it's like this in a lot of sports, but as soon as the media, cotton onto anything, these really negative, bad headlines come out. And I've spoken to a lot of my friends in the sport, and they're almost like at their wits' end with it. They're like, I'm just not going to say anything because they're all going to take it out of context and I'm going to become the bad guy. And it's definitely happened to me. When I spoke out originally about the kit, there was quite a few negative headlines that had twisted my words, and that's definitely not the angle that I was coming from. So I definitely feel like there is a barrier, but for me, I've kind of achieved everything I would have ever dreamt of in this sport. So now I kind of feel like I'm a flag bearer for raising these issues, and I'm going to talk out and share my opinions, because I really, really want to help others. And I just really don't want to see young athletes go through what I did and drop out of the sport, because it's way more likely these days with, the negativity around social media. So I just feel very passionate about that.
Thank you. And I know, Rimla, when you opened there, you were talking about choice, that ultimately that's the thing, isn't it? I think I remember seeing a little bit of the backlash you got, Holly, and I felt a bit guilty because that was our conversation in the Telegraph, wasn't it? But some of that negativity, but ultimately it's about women doing what, and girls wearing what they want to wear. So kind of choice is the important thing here, isn't it?
I actually find it incredible that we're talking about this in many ways. I mean, it's great that we are, but I find it incredible that we are. Because, I mean, even Wendy's talked about there in terms of the guidelines that are there, they're guidelines, right? They're not rules that you must have this and you must have that. And it's the same really for international federations that dictate the rules, kind of in the elite side of things. We're talking about, Tess talked about tradition, we're talking about historic stuff that's been there. And, it's that sense that I've always had in the sort of sports industry in particular, where you've got people just saying, you'll ask a question about anything, whether it's kits or something else. Oh, but we've always done it this way. And you kind of go, well, why? Why? What is the reason for this? Is there a legitimate reason for us doing it this way? Is there a legitimate reason for us having this particular kit? And if you had a blank sheet of paper, is this what you'd do? If you knew no other way, is this what you would do? And I just don't think we would. Whether it's to do with whites, you mentioned Maggie, for example, coming into Lewis, and kind of one of the first things she did was to say, well, we're renewing the kit, get rid of the white shorts. It's as simple as that, the only areas that need to be considered are fairness and safety, really, from a sporting perspective. And I think about swimming, for example. So part of my work with kind of kit has been around bikinis, and obviously I forget which games it was, but I think it was the Sydney ones, maybe 2000, 2004, something like that, where you had swimmers wearing full body streamlined kit, and that was giving them competitive advantage, right? So that's where FINA came in and said, right, we're going to limit how much of your body you can cover. So I get that from a competitiveness perspective and a fairness perspective, but the bikini is not going to give you a competitive advantage, and it's going to drag, if anything. So, there are ways to come around this. So one of the things that I worked on with Swim England, as they're now known, was amateur swimming competitions and allowing the bikini into there, because we had at the Muslim Women's Sport Foundation, we had women and their girls and their parents coming to us and saying, I would love to compete. I would love to go on that pathway of competition, but I can't because the person that's laying down the rules is telling me I can't. So we changed that, but actually trying to get that to FINA level is even more. It's just difficult because people don't want to even go there to consider it because of their own kind of preconceptions and their historic kind of way of looking at things. And this is where I think the manufacturers of kit come in, and they're so important. So with FINA, can you imagine if Speedo and other kind of Nike and others come forward and say, well, actually we've done some R&D, we found something that covers someone's body if they choose to cover, but doesn't give them competitive advantage over what you're saying is allowed. If that were possible, then why would FINA say no? And the same with Nike and the Euros this summer. The white shorts were already there. Nike had decided that the white shorts were what the women's team were going to wear, and the players like Beth Mead and others were saying, well, actually we don't want to wear these, but we're going to have to wait now till the next set come through. And there they are for this world, this tournament that's going to go across the world. They've won the tournament and they're not feeling comfortable within themselves because they're worried about wearing white shorts. It isn't right. We shouldn't have to talk about these things. We should just be acting.
It's so true, isn't it? There's a couple of questions coming in about whether it comes from the top and trickles down, or we don't want to talk about trickle down economics on this podcast, or whether it is about people driving change from the bottom. And I think it's interesting. I had a fantastic email from a woman who was a chair of a rugby club, local rugby club, and was trying to get the shorts changed. The girls didn't want to play in white shorts, and someone on the council of her club was saying, well, the England, the Red Roses play in white shorts. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough. So that was like the argument used against her. It's like, if it's good enough for the national team, it's good enough for our girls. And I'm really pleased and proud of how hard she worked to change it, and she did change it in the end. So that's such a key point, isn't it? When we then see those top international teams playing in kit, it's hard then for grassroots sports to not feel they have to emulate and follow that too. There's a lovely comment from Keith Lewis in the Q&A too, Rimla, which is, I just want to follow up with another point about rugby, about how good and inclusive rugby has been in terms of allowing the hijab and women to play and people to play in all kinds of kit. So what do you think in terms of the FIFA ban on the hijab as was, and now in other sports too, where's the difference? Why is it okay in rugby but it's not okay? Is there still a ban in basketball? There certainly was, wasn't there?
No, there was. So FIFA were the first ones to outright ban the hijab and religious any religious headgear in sport. But obviously the hijab took sort of the front, the headlines, as it were, because it had such an immediate impact on millions of girls across the world. But as soon as FIFA, we managed to overturn the ban there, and all that hard work over 7 years to get that overturned, FIBA in their all their intelligence decided to initiate a ban in basketball, and actually devastated at least 2 women that I know that wanted to go professional, and were good enough to go professional, absolutely. So yeah, unfortunately, that's when FIBA put the ban in place. That's where I kind of got this sense of, for goodness sake, we're gonna have to go through this again, this whole kind of challenging the ban. And we did overturn it again, largely due to Bilqis Abdul Qadir, who's this amazing basketballer, like I say, from America, who wanted to go professional. But there are so many other sports. I mean, it's great, Keith, that we've got the hijab in rugby that's allowed and specifically mentioned. I think I'm guessing here the fact that someone like Zainab, who plays rugby union, is in the sport, can advocate for that, helps along the way. What I would like is for the rules to just not be restrictive, so that if and when somebody from a different background, or a girl that chooses to dress in a different way, wants to enter a sport, she has the opportunity. She doesn't immediately come up with a barrier. And I guess from a religious headgear and the hijab ban's perspective, one of the things I'm currently trying to work on in my so-called spare time is really around working proactively with sports to look at their kits and say, how can you be more inclusive here? And specifically around the hijab, but just generally as well. How can we make sure that no other sport puts a ban in place, whether it's the hijab or the burkini, whatever it might be, that stops women from every background taking part. And I need some legal support with that, or someone that understands all this stuff. So if anyone wants to help out, please let me know. But that's what needs to be done in terms of action. We need to change the rules at the international federation level, because that is what trickles down right down to club level.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and it's fun. The work you're doing is fantastic, Rimla. So yeah, power to you, and we'll spread the word for more support too there. And we know historically that women's sport's always been considered as more acceptable, isn't it? If we're dressing femininely, what we traditionally might have considered femininely, and wearing skirts and skorts and so on. So Tess, it's fantastic to hear about the work you're doing in hockey. What's general opinion in terms of that, of playing in dresses, and the same for netball, that playing at an international level in netball dresses and skirts?
There's such an interesting part. It's where my whole interest came from, was why do we still wear skorts, and why is that the legacy? And as soon as you understand why, you're immediately put off by what the reasons are. Acceptability in sport, as you said, for women has come from femininity, and you have to understand where femininity comes from. It's docility, it's submissiveness, it's to look a certain way. It's around physique, it's around appearance, behavior. So feminine itself, has so much baggage to it that it creates almost a paradox when you put it together with sport, which is traditionally the masculine. But then again, if you understand what masculine traditionally means, it means strong, powerful, dominant, aggressive, dare I say. And so when you have these two conflicting so-called conflicting forces, that makes it very difficult for a woman to exist in this space. And that's called the athletic feminine identity paradox. And that is why there are so many tensions in sports so if you look at the way rugby and football were traditionally conceived of as women invading men's sports, whereas hockey and netball have been kind of feminized by the skirt or the dress. So my big interest is, okay, now we're in the 21st century. Do we still need to feminize sports for us to be able to play them? And I ask these questions to my teammates. I say, why do we still wear skorts? And they say, well, we just look nicer. It's more professional. It's like, and I'm like, do you really think that? Or is that your social internalization of culture? And I think it is the latter, because no one comes out of, it grows up thinking it's a certain way unless you're told it's a certain way. That's socialization. So what I've been trying to understand is it practical, professional, or patriarchal, is where do our beliefs for the skort come from, and that's directly linked to what it means to be a certain gender. And that in the academic term is called cultural intelligibility. Can I understand that you are a female? Can I understand that you're a female playing sport, and that is okay? So that's sort of the logic. So when we look at, you talk about the hyperfeminization and the objectification of women, that is to overemphasize, hyperfeminize a woman so that they are acceptable in that sport space. So I think that one day we'll get to a stage where you don't have to be overly feminized to be accepted in sport. And that's where I think uniform comes in, because uniform itself, let's take the skirt, for example, or the dress, it itself is the paradox. It is saying that you can only play the sport as a woman if you wear this, because it shows that you're a woman so that you can play sport. So it's the complete circle paradox that's going on. So yeah, to sum up, I think if we do change policy and we do change practice, I think you can see some of these dominant narratives start to change.
And it is, I could talk to you forever, Tess. I know a whole new chapter in my book there on that topic too. But it is fascinating, isn't it, when you hear it kind of explained in that way, the historical impact that we still see today for those things. Like we worked a while ago with Harlequins rugby actually, and the late stages of our agency. We're going to do an April Fool, which was around the Game Changers event that they had, that we were going to design a skirt for them to play rugby in a skirt. We'd even had it mocked up with all the the panels in the different colours to say we wanted to feminise rugby, you know, attract more women to it, as hockey and netball had, to play in a skirt. And obviously it was quite laughable at the time, and the April Fool never went ahead for various reasons. But when I'm talking to schools and to others now, I often say, you know, how would we feel if the Lionesses ran out in skirts? It would be laughable to almost change, to think about them running out of Wembley in floaty white skirts. But we think, but that's still okay for tennis and golf and netball and hockey and those sports too.
But here's the funny thing though, Sue. Everybody trains in shorts. I went on a massive Instagram stalk of Emma Raducanu because she plays in a skirt, but every single photo of her training on Instagram is in shorts. And you know, there's never been a hockey player who's done a fitness test in a skort, because it is impractical. So here's where I think we can win. I think we drop it's gender discrimination, because, you know, clearly that's not going to work. So instead we go for what is performance enhancing. And this is how I started to get my teammates involved. I'm saying, what's going to make the difference? We're in the 40-degree heat in Tokyo. What is going to make the difference? It's not a lightweight skirt. It's no skirt at all. It's shorts. So I think if we go along the performance enhancing and comfort route, I think we can make a lot of progress.
Fantastic. Thank you. You know, there's so much to unpack there, isn't there? In terms of, I guess, in schools and so on, Wendy, I don't just restricting you to that area, but in terms of the attitude to skirts, and I remember talking to a director of sport recently who said, actually, I talked to my girls in netball and they all love, the netball girls all love their dresses. My point was, well, that's lovely that they do. I'm more concerned about those that aren't in the netball team anymore, that have given up playing because they don't want to wear the dresses. So I guess that's often an answer we hear, is actually the women that are playing, you know, love, as Tessa said, they love what they're playing in.
Yeah, and you know, and I think it's not surprising when you look at schools that, you know, teachers teach to their strengths. They, you know, they put on opportunities that are attractive for more students like themselves. And so role models and, you know, actually having the right conversations with a range of girls that are representative of your school population, not just the girls that you see that come to you and talk to you, seeking out and having, you know, those depths of conversations with a range of girls, because we know that, you know, there is a challenge for girls where, you know, they've got this constant struggle around what they see on social media, how they're meant to look, the feminine, you know, and, you know, all of the, you know, selfie images that you see. And that clearly is that conflict with getting changed and being, you know, as Tessa, for all the reasons that Tessa's outlined in terms of being competitive, you know, getting hot and sweaty. And for many of those girls, you know, that is a real challenge, and therefore you know, they don't want to kind of finish PE and then have to go to their next lesson, you know, hot and sweaty and feeling like, you know, everything that they've done to make themselves feel, you know, who they are in their identity. So that there's got to be a way in which we create the right environment where girls feel safe, where they feel valued, and where they have that sense of belonging. Kit's one element to that, but actually also, you know, how they, you know, the activities on offer, how they're delivered, you know, give and hearing that actually, yes, you know, we're going to make the changing rooms more a better environment for you. We're going to build in time where you've got, you know, time to kind of make sure that, you know, and nobody wants to shower in a secondary facilities. That's a whole different conversation around, you know, actually the state of secondary PE facilities, because that's another podcast. But absolutely, I think it's building girls' confidence and helping them normalise that actually how you feel, the benefits of being active, and actually removing some of those inhibitions for them to make them see that that's a space they want to be in.
Thank you. And I'd like to move on if I can. I'm conscious I'm just trying to whistle through my topics. It's a big area, isn't it? But maybe a little bit more around a slightly murky area, really, but around women's sports clothing being designed to objectify women's bodies, which I guess is a build on from that femininity. What we've seen, I mean, anyone that saw the Norwegian beach handball, you know, tiny bikinis last year, pictured next to the men's team in their shorts and so on, will understand the kind of challenges that we face. I don't know, it's a difficult topic, isn't it? Because we do want women to have choice, and I think Holly and I have had that conversation before too, that you want women to have, if women want to exhibit their bodies and they feel that's how they want to compete, then you want to allow them to do so. We don't want to be restrictive, but we want to have that choice too. So I don't know if any of you have got thoughts on, I guess, practical ways in which we can kind of change some of those beliefs and views moving forward, in terms of that women playing in minimal kits, be it high cut leotards, bikini bottoms and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I have talked about this a lot, and when the camera pans along the field of 12 girls out there, you know, I'm the only one wearing what I wear. You know, I have long shorts on to cover my thighs. I do not want to have my belly out on TV, and that's very unusual. But I think, for starters, like me being in that shows to people at home that this is an option to wear. I don't have to be, you know, a lot of girls do feel comfortable wearing crop top, shorts, knickers. That's absolutely fine, but a lot of girls don't. So the fact that I have the option out there and girls are seeing that, I've had a lot of feedback as to how much of a positive thing that is. And I think it is a very difficult, like you said, a very difficult conversation or a topic to talk about. And when Tess was talking about the femininity in athletics, although we don't wear skorts or dresses or anything like that, there is a big range. And I almost feel like sport, especially in athletics, I'm not sure on others, has been lost in terms of, you know, girls want to be out there and look great, but it's gone to the extremes of, it's more of a fashion show. How kind of great and sexy can you look? Because that is what sells, and there's no getting away from that. But what isn't being rewarded is girls out there who are just out there because they want to do sport. They want to fling themselves over a pole. They want to run as fast as they can. They're sweaty, they're red-faced, they look terrible, but that's not what sport's about. Like, it's the purity of sport. And I think what you were just saying about in schools, and I would go to maths, I'd go to English, and I'd be sweating, I'd be red-faced, because I'm one of those girls that I'll keep a red face for a good hour after I've played sport. And girls don't want to do that these days because of social media and the pressure to look good. And I think, yeah, the more it can be talked about, the more these barriers can be broken down, because it's just a terribly sad state of affairs, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree. And I think it is, there's not more we can see women being sweaty and enjoying sport in the way that men have over time. That definitely has to, you know, have an impact, make a change there. I've got a couple of sorry, Wendy, did you want to say something there?
I was just going to add, really, and I think it's a responsibility of us all, you know, really to see the person, to see the ability, and to talk about the performance and not how they look. And I think just, you know, time and time again, you just, you know, you see it, you hear kind of the comments of, well, look what they're wearing, or their hair's strange, or, you know, whatever it might be. And that anything that detracts from, actually, this is a person that's participating to the best of their ability, or, you know, for the maximum enjoyment. That's really what we really need to keep bringing it back to, and challenging everybody to do so.
Because if I can add, I say I'm watching football, and you know, a male football player has mud everywhere, their hair's all over the show and they're sweating. Nobody would ever make a comment at all. But if I was out there playing football and I was in a tackle and my hair was all over the show, I had mud on my face and I was sweaty, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have an opinion on, oh, like, gosh, she looks like a right state out there. I'm 100% sure that happens. But that shouldn't happen. Like, I don't understand why that still happens in today's society.
I think it just really does vary from sport to sport, like you say, Holly, because I mean, I remember Jodie Cunningham's podcast, actually, to give a shout out to your podcast again, Sue.
Thank you, nicely done.
You know, we've got the Rugby League World Cup coming up, just starting this weekend. We've got the men's, women's and the wheelchair all taking part at the same time. You know, trying to give as much equality and kind of parity across the sports as it comes. But Jodie talks about in that podcast the fact that she loved it, because she loved rugby league because you could come as you are, right? You could come with whatever colour kit you wanted, you know, ribbons in your hair, whatever it was, but you were still doing the same thing. You were tackling hard, you were running hard, you were getting muddy and dirty, and you would, and kind of that question of femininity just wasn't there. And what I would love to see, I mean, I think one of the best pictures for me that came from when the Olympics was with the Egyptian beach volleyball players and the German beach volleyball players in that match. that you had Dua, who was there with her hijab on, and her partner in the doubles match, that doesn't wear the hijab but still covers the rest. So that there was the two of them, there was a difference there, but there was also that kind of difference between what was across the net and there. And the thing is, it was still about the sport. I think people made it about more than that in terms of the kit, but it was just about being competitive and you know, enjoying the sporting spectacle that was there. So I think that actually media and the way this all gets covered is so important, in terms of making sure. So for example, with the Norwegian women's beach handball team being fined for wearing shorts instead of bikinis, right? Ridiculous. But can we see the same outrage when girls are forced to not wear hijab or not allowed to cover? Because actually forcing women out of clothing is just as, I would say, as a good friend of mine and big sister really, Shireen, says to me all the time, it's just as violent as forcing women into clothes. So for me, it's just, we need to, I think, really put the pressure on the media as well to start covering this properly. There's something here around brands, definitely. There's something here around media which can help put the pressure to create the change that we want to see. But I absolutely agree with what Tess was saying earlier on as well, that you know, that kind of framing it in the right way that athletes can get behind it. It's that little triangle that we've got right there of the athletes, media, and the brands to create the pressure on the sports to make the changes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time. There's a really interesting there's lots of interesting comments in the Q&A, but an interesting piece about unisex kit and the idea of having unisex kit. And I love that Charlie said unisex in her mind usually means it's just men's kit, but women have to wear it. That does tend to be what we mean by, I think, what we mean by unisex. And I think we've seen that. I know there was a bit of an issue last year with the Harlequins big game, with a women's rugby kit that would look like men's kit. So I think one of the athletes said we wouldn't have had you know, put some of the men in a women's size 14 and see how they feel about playing in unisex kit. So I think there have been issues there. As I say, I'm conscious of time and there's so much we could go into here, but I would like just to go round and get some kind of final thoughts from you, really, if I can do, as we're closing. But I think I've got a minute each would work here. But in terms of if there was one thing that you think could have the biggest impact, I would like us to take away, I think some really interesting things here in terms of the brands and, you know, the impact that media can have on athletes too, in terms of driving that change and highlighting that change. But if either from this conversation or your own thoughts, if there was one thing that you would like to share that we could take away that you feel will have a biggest impact in this space. Wendy, I'm going to start with you again because I started with you at the beginning, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I guess for me, it is really, we need to keep championing that voice of, you know, participants, whether that's girls in school, whether it's, you know, at all levels, and really need to kind of challenge leaders at whatever level that we're working with, and whether that's school leaders, whether that's, you know, as Rimla's just said, you know, the brands, media, keep profiling that and really kind of keep championing, as you know, as Holly and Tess are obviously doing such an amazing job of doing within their sport. I think for me, that's, I think one thing that I really would like to see a bit more conversation around it from a school's perspective as well, is things like sports bras. And I know, again, that's probably another conversation, but you know, actually, why have we not got sports bra as a recommended item on a kit list, PE kit list, for example? You know, too many girls running around really feeling uncomfortable yet again, and that's another, you know, another element where, you know, we could make a big difference to how girls feel.
There's so much to cover. You got 4 points in there, Wendy. I've got 2 minutes now. Tess, what would your thoughts be? Thank you, Wendy.
So my thoughts are, policy takes a while to change. It's slow. But things on the ground can move really quickly, like what this Marlow hockey, you can wear whatever you want thing did. So the takeaway that I would give to those watching would be, if you have whoever you have you're in charge of, give them the choice there and then and see what happens. Make choice real, and ensure that people that you like, make sure they feel safe, that they can actually express themselves. And if you do that, hopefully you will see that policy can then be changed afterwards. But real action starts from the ground. So I would open up for choice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tess. Rimla, what would yours be?
I think the point that I made up front of choice is definitely there. Ultimately, it's about the user as far as I'm concerned. It's the same as any other area of life. It's about what the person wants. But I would just say for those that are here on this webinar or watching back, it's, for me, just always question why. Just question why we're doing this the way that we're doing it. And it doesn't just apply to kits. Because oftentimes you'll find that there's no real rational reason for it, and there is a better way to do it. So I would just say question, in whatever your sphere of influence is, question why we're doing things the way that we're doing them.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you, Rimla. And no pressure, Holly, but over to you for the last point.
All the options have got no. I would just, again, like we've touched on, ask brands and national governing bodies to just ask the athletes what they want. It's almost, I like the idea of more choices, but has anyone ever sat down with a group of shot putters and said, what is it that you want to wear? Because I bet it hasn't happened, and I'd just like to see a lot more of that from the brands and the governing bodies, rather than just choosing 4 options. These are your 4 options. What do you want to wear? I'd just like to see a bit more of that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. We're all going to go away and be more rigorously inclusive now. I'm going to use that lovely phrase, Tess. But thank you to Wendy, Tess, Rimla and Holly. And thank you to everyone who's joined us in the fantastic conversations that have been going on in the Q&A too. But really appreciate your time. So thank you all so much.